The mysterious return. The old ship floated in the vast emptiness of space, a rusting monument to forgotten times. Its hull, once sleek and proud, now wore the marks of years spent drifting in the void. The ship had been abandoned for a long time. No crew, no passengers, just silence. And it was that silence that made it the perfect place to escape. But for Jack, it was more than just an empty ship. It was his only chance. A single part, a small spare part, was all he needed to fix his broken ship and get back to Earth. For the past few weeks, he'd been drifting from station to station, trying to find a way back home. But nothing had worked. His ship had failed him. And now he was stuck in deep space with nothing but the stars for company. The ship he was returning to now, an old freighter abandoned years ago, was his last hope. He remembered the first time he found it. A wrecked but sturdy thing, left behind when the previous owners had abandoned it in a hurry. It was perfect for scavenging. No one had been there in years, and Jack was sure no one else would come for it. The engines of his small shuttle hummed quietly as he maneuvered toward the docking bay. The freighter's docking port looked as dilapidated as the rest of the ship. The area had grown thick with space dust, and the outer hull had lost its original shine. A chill ran down Jack's spine as his shuttle's sensors beeped, signaling the proximity of his destination. He brought the shuttle in slowly, carefully docking with the abandoned ship. As the engines powered down, Jack noticed something strange, a faint flicker in the corner of his vision. For a moment, he thought it was just a glitch in the system, but it happened again. The light, far off in the distance. Jack furrowed his brow. He hadn't seen any signs of life when he last scanned the ship's exterior. This wasn't right. If someone else had gotten here before him, he wasn't going to be happy. He couldn't afford to waste time fighting or negotiating with another scavenger. He needed that part. Now, grabbing his gear, Jack opened the hatch and stepped out onto the cold metal of the abandoned ship. The air was stale, and the ship's atmosphere was barely breathable, enough to keep a body alive, but not much more. The corridors were dark, the flickering lights giving the whole place a haunted feeling. It was the perfect place for someone to hide. He grabbed a flashlight from his belt and shone it down the hallway. The dust-coated floor stretched out in front of him, leading deeper into the ship. Every step he took echoed eerily in the emptiness. His boots clanked against the metal floors, his heart pounding faster with every footstep. Then he heard it, a faint sound, barely noticeable. It wasn't the hum of the ship's machinery or the creaking of old metal. It was something else, a soft, skittering noise, like the scurry of small feet across the floor. Jack froze. The sound came from further down the hall. His flashlight flickered as if the ship itself was warning him. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. The halls twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the heart of the ship. With every step, the sound grew louder. Whoever, or whatever, was here was not alone. Jack's fingers tightened around the flashlight, his knuckles white with tension. Around a corner, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. A door, slightly ajar. No ship had left this place in years, and there was no reason for anyone to be hiding here. Yet, the door was open. The flickering light from inside the room seemed to beckon him. He approached the door slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. There was something inside, something he wasn't supposed to find. A shadow darted across the doorway, and Jack quickly stepped back. His hand instinctively reached for the blaster at his hip. He had no idea what he was about to face, but his instincts told him it wouldn't be easy. From the darkness of the room, he saw a small figure step into the faint light. It was a girl, not human. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, her hair a silvery white mass that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. She was dressed in tattered clothes, her body frail but her eyes. Those eyes, wide with terror. Jack's grip on the blaster loosened, but only slightly. He wasn't sure what he was looking at. An alien, a lost survivor. Whoever she was not supposed to be here. She didn't move at first. her gaze locked with his, fear and confusion written across her face. Jack could see her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to control her breathing. She was panicking. "Hey, it's okay," Jack said softly, his voice low but steady. He didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl's eyes darted to the door, then back to him. She was clearly terrified, and Jack could see why. She had been hiding in a place like this for God knew how long. What had she been running from? He took a cautious step toward her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. He wasn't sure if she could even understand him. The girl flinched but didn't answer. Instead, she backed further into the room, her eyes never leaving him. She was afraid, but Jack wasn't sure if it was him she was afraid of, or something else. Something bigger. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's decaying systems. Jack's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. This wasn't just an abandoned ship. It wasn't just an ordinary scavenger hunt. Something was very wrong. And Jack was about to find out exactly what. The encounter. Jack's heart raced as the alien girl backed further into the shadows of the room. The dim light from his flashlight flickered over her face, revealing her wide, terrified eyes. Her skin shimmered with a soft glow, her silvery hair tangled around her face like something from a nightmare. She looked like she didn't belong in this broken ship, like she didn't belong anywhere at all. "Hey," Jack repeated, his voice softer now, trying to calm her down. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond. Her eyes darted from Jack to the door, then back to him. It was as if she was weighing her options, whether to run or to trust the strange human standing in front of her. Jack felt a sudden wave of sympathy for the girl. She couldn't have been here for long, but the fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Whatever she was running from, it had to be bad. Really bad. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Jack wasn't sure what to do. He'd never encountered an alien like her before, and he wasn't sure how to communicate with her. He didn't even know if she understood him. But the one thing Jack knew for sure was that she wasn't just some random survivor of the ship's crew. No, this girl was hiding, and someone, or something, was after her. She looked at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then, slowly, she took a small step forward. Jack tensed. She was close now, within arm's reach. But instead of attacking, she did something completely unexpected. With shaking hands, she pulled something from around her neck. It was a small, glowing object, a stone-like device that seemed to pulse with energy. The light from the device was faint but mesmerizing, casting strange shadows on the walls. The girl held it out to Jack, her eyes pleading. "What is this?" Jack asked, his voice quiet but curious. He didn't touch the device, though. Something about it felt off, like it was too important for him to hold without understanding what it was. The girl didn't speak. She simply nodded at the device, her wide eyes still locked on his. She was clearly trying to tell him something. But Jack couldn't decipher her actions. He didn't know what she wanted or why she was giving him this strange object. Jack hesitated. He had a sinking feeling in his gut. Whatever this device was, it was the key to understanding why she was here, why she was running, and why the ship felt so wrong. The girl was in trouble, and Jack could feel the weight of it. He glanced around the room, half expecting someone or something to appear from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the girl, the device, and the eerie hum of the ship. A deep chill settled in his bones. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a distant thud, the unmistakable sound of something heavy crashing against the ship's hull. The girl jumped, her body stiffening in terror. She quickly turned her head toward the sound, her eyes wide with fear. Jack felt his pulse quicken. Whatever that sound was, it wasn't a coincidence. Another thud. Closer this time. The girl backed away from Jack, clutching the glowing device to her chest. She looked at him one last time, her expression filled with desperation. And then, without another word, she turned and bolted, disappearing into the shadows of the ship's maze-like corridors. Jack stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone on this ship anymore. And neither was she. His mind raced. Who was chasing her? Why had she been hiding in the ship? And what was the deal with the glowing device? Jack had no answers yet, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was about to get pulled into something much bigger than just scavenging parts. He had to follow her. He had to find out what was going on. Jack didn't waste a second. He grabbed his blaster from his belt and sprinted down the corridor, keeping to the shadows as best as he could. The sound of the girl's footsteps echoed faintly ahead of him, but Jack couldn't see her. She was fast, and she knew this ship better than he did. He needed to catch up. But the deeper Jack went into the ship, the more he felt the strange, uncomfortable weight of being watched. The walls seemed to close in on him, and every creak and groan of the ship made him jump. Something was off. He had to find out what, before it was too late. Finally, he rounded a corner and caught sight of her again. The alien girl was crouched down near a darkened doorway, her back pressed against the wall as she peered cautiously down the hallway. She was waiting for something or someone. Jack slowed his pace, trying not to make a sound. He knew he was getting closer to the truth. Whatever it was hiding in the heart of this ship, and the girl was the key to uncovering it. But as he crept closer, a new sound filled the air. This time, it wasn't a thud. It was something worse. A low, mechanical hum, something much more dangerous. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Whoever, or whatever, was after the girl was getting closer, and it wouldn't be long before they found both of them. The chase had begun. The alien's secret. Jack didn't wait another second. He stepped into the dimly lit corridor, his boots making soft thuds against the metal floor. The girl was still crouching by the doorway, her body tense, every muscle in her small frame coiled like a spring. Her eyes darted between Jack and the hallway, her breathing quick and shallow. She was afraid, terrified, even. Jack could see it now more clearly. She wasn't just hiding from something. She was running from something relentless, something that wasn't going to stop until it had her. And judging by the way she looked at him, Jack wasn't sure if she thought he could help her, or if he was about to become a part of the problem. He took a step toward her, trying to remain calm despite the rising anxiety that gripped him. "What's going on?" Jack asked quietly. He didn't want to startle her, but he needed answers. "Who's chasing you?" The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled the glowing device from her chest once again, holding it out toward him. Her hand shook slightly, and Jack could see the weight of fear in her eyes. There was a story here, a story he wasn't going to understand unless she told him. But she couldn't speak his language, at least not yet. Without warning, she pressed the device into his hand. Jack stared down at it, his fingers brushing the smooth, cool surface. It was small, about the size of his palm, but it hummed with an energy he couldn't identify. The glow was faint but steady, like a heartbeat. It felt important, like it carried the weight of an entire mystery. The girl pointed to the device, and then to her chest. She repeated the motion, her eyes pleading. Jack looked back at the device. It wasn't just a piece of alien tech. It was something more, something that connected her to whatever she was running from. "You want me to keep it?" Jack asked, though it felt like a stupid question. She was already giving it to him. She nodded frantically, her gaze now darting nervously over his shoulder. The sounds in the distance had grown louder. That mechanical hum was getting closer. Jack could feel the cold sweat running down the back of his neck. Time was running out. Without another word, the girl motioned for him to follow her. Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He didn't have a choice. If he didn't help her, whatever was chasing her would be after him next. She led him through the maze of corridors, her steps light and quick as she darted ahead, never once looking back. Jack kept his distance but stayed close enough to follow her. The ship felt more alive with each passing second, every turn revealing new unsettling sights. The air was thick with tension, and the faint buzz of dying lights above only added to the unsettling atmosphere. As they passed through what looked like the ship's living quarters, Jack noticed something strange. The walls were scratched and covered in signs of distress, some sort of struggle. Empty crates were scattered across the floor, as though someone had left in a hurry. But none of this explained who she was or why she was hiding here. Jack's curiosity was burning, but he kept his questions to himself for now. The girl was clearly in more danger than he had first imagined. It wasn't just the device. It was what the device represented. It was a key to something powerful. Finally, they reached a large open area. It was the engine room, or at least, it used to be. Now, it was a quiet, dark chamber filled with the remnants of broken machinery. The girl stopped in the center of the room, and Jack almost collided with her. She was staring at something ahead, her eyes wide and focused. At first, Jack didn't see what she was looking at, but as he followed her gaze, his heart skipped a beat. A large screen flickered to life, and a low hum filled the air. It was a holographic display, projecting an image of a strange, distant planet. The planet was covered in vast, glowing structures, alien cities that looked ancient but strangely advanced at the same time. The girl stepped forward, her eyes still fixed on the screen. She placed her hand on the surface of the device in Jack's hand. The screen flickered again, and the holographic image zoomed in on a particular structure on the planet's surface. It was a massive black pyramid-like building, its shape unlike anything Jack had ever seen. She turned to him, her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jack could see the full depth of fear in them. The pyramid wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of something dangerous, something that had been chasing her. And now it seemed to be targeting Jack too. "It's them," she whispered, though the words were almost inaudible. "They want it. They want us." The words hung in the air like a chilling warning. Jack's mind raced as the gravity of the situation hit him. The device in his hand wasn't just some random artifact. It was a key to this planet, to whatever was inside that pyramid, and whatever was inside was something the alien faction was willing to kill for. The girl's hand was still on the device, and she looked at him, her eyes pleading again. She wanted him to help her, but she couldn't say it. Not in words. Jack understood now. She wasn't just hiding from something. She was hiding with something. And that something was worth more than either of them could imagine. Suddenly, the hum in the distance grew louder. Jack turned toward the sound, his grip tightening on the device in his hand. They didn't have much time. "Run," Jack said, more to himself than to her. They had to get out of there. Fast. Whoever was chasing them was getting closer, and there was no telling what would happen if they caught up. The girl's eyes widened, and she didn't hesitate. She turned and sprinted toward the nearest exit, her movements swift and determined. Jack followed, clutching the device tightly. The truth was clear now. This was just the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, Jack knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back. The chase begins. The ship had never felt so alive, or so suffocating. Jack followed the girl through the winding corridors of the abandoned freighter, each turn seeming more like a trap than a passageway. The low hum of distant machinery seemed to grow louder with each step, echoing through the ship like the heartbeat of something ancient, something angry. Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. Jack didn't need to look back to know they were coming. Whoever, or whatever, was chasing them wasn't far behind. They were relentless. The thuds of boots on metal grew more distinct, the sound almost synchronized with the pounding of Jack's heart. His mind raced, calculating their next move. He needed to get them both out of here. But the girl was moving faster now, her feet barely touching the floor, as she darted ahead with incredible agility. Jack barely kept up. Her eyes were locked ahead, never faltering, never slowing down. She knew the ship's layout better than he did, and in that moment, Jack was thankful for it. She was their best chance at survival. They burst through a set of double doors into what looked like an old storage bay. The room was dark and filled with old crates, tools, and other forgotten debris. Jack's eyes scanned the area, looking for anything useful, anything that could help them escape. The girl stopped for just a second, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. She glanced at him, and Jack could see the fear in her eyes again. She was scared, not just for herself, but for him too. She wasn't just running to survive, she was running to protect something, and that something was him now. She placed her trust in him. "We need to move," Jack muttered, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." The girl nodded without hesitation and motioned toward the far side of the storage bay. Jack followed her lead, but before they could reach the exit, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps filled the air, growing louder and closer. The enemy was here. A metallic clang echoed through the room as something heavy slammed against the outer door, shaking the walls. Jack's heart jumped. They were too late. The enemy had found them. Suddenly, the doors leading into the storage bay burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armored figures. Their faces were hidden behind black helmets, their bodies encased in dark, reflective armor that glinted in the dim light. The weapons they carried looked like they were designed for one purpose: to hunt and kill. Jack felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. There was no way they were getting out of this without a fight. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice cold and mechanical as it echoed from his helmet. "Give her to us," he ordered, his tone flat but filled with authority. "Now." The girl stepped in front of Jack, her body tense as if ready to flee again at any moment. But she didn't speak. She couldn't. All she had was the device in her hand, still glowing faintly, the only thing that stood between her and whatever these soldiers wanted. Jack's mind raced. They had to buy some time. He wasn't about to hand her over, not when he'd come this far. Before he could act, the leader of the squad raised his hand, signaling the others to hold their positions. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice now edged with something darker. "This girl carries something far more dangerous than you can comprehend. We've been tracking her for weeks. She belongs to us." The girl's grip on the glowing device tightened, her eyes flashing with defiance. It was clear now that the soldiers weren't just after her, they were after what she carried. And they'd stop at nothing to get it. "We don't have to do this," Jack said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He glanced at the girl, who was still standing protectively in front of him. "You want the device. You'll have to take it from me first." The leader tilted his head slightly, as if considering Jack's words. For a split second, there was a flicker of something in his posture, doubt perhaps. But then the silence broke. A low hum filled the room, the sound of their weapons powering up. The tension in the air thickened like a storm waiting to break. Before Jack could even think, the first soldier raised his blaster. In a blur of motion, Jack dove toward a nearby stack of crates, pulling the girl with him as shots rang out, scorching the air around them. The crates exploded in a shower of debris, sending both Jack and the girl sprawling to the floor. The force of the blast knocked the breath from his lungs, and his head spun as he struggled to regain his footing. The girl was already up, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. Without a word, she motioned to a small access hatch on the far side of the room. They didn't have time to fight back. They needed to escape. Now. Jack followed her, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he ran. The soldiers weren't far behind, their footsteps echoing loudly as they closed the distance. Jack's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, not unless they had a way off this ship. The hatch opened with a groan, and the girl scrambled through it first, disappearing into the darkness of the ship's lower levels. Jack was right behind her, his hand gripping the edge of the hatch just as the first blast from the soldiers' weapons grazed his leg. He winced but kept moving, squeezing through the hatch as fast as he could. Once inside, the hatch slammed shut behind them with a loud thud, sealing them off from the soldiers for the moment. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, and he could hear his breath echoing in the tight, claustrophobic space. They were safe, for now, but the chase had only just begun. The girl was already moving ahead, her body gliding effortlessly through the dark corridor. Jack followed, trying to keep up, but his mind was already spinning. Whoever these soldiers were, they weren't going to stop, and they were closing in fast. But the girl had something they wanted, and Jack knew that as long as she had the device, they'd keep coming for her, keep coming for them both. There was no turning back now. The first confrontation. The low hum of the ship's dying engines seemed to grow louder as Jack and the girl made their way through the dark, winding corridors. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. The ship was like a maze, narrow hallways stretching out into endless dark rooms and spaces, all tangled together in ways Jack didn't fully understand. Each step they took felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the knowledge that something was chasing them, something relentless, and something with far more resources than either of them had. Jack glanced at the girl, her face tense, her eyes darting nervously around them. She wasn't speaking, but her every movement screamed urgency. It was as if she could feel them coming, feel the soldiers tracking them. Every so often, she would glance over her shoulder, and Jack could sense the fear in her, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Jack didn't know how long they had been running, but the air was growing thick with the stench of fear. The ship's ancient walls creaked around them, the metallic groans echoing through the dark passages like whispers of something old and dying. He wanted to ask her more about the device, about what was really going on, but the words never left his lips. There was no time for questions, not now. They had to keep moving. Then a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible click echoed from the darkness ahead, followed by a sharp hiss as a door slid open. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The girl froze too, her body stiffening as she listened, her hand instinctively reaching for the glowing device that she still clutched tightly to her chest. The silence that followed was deafening. The air seemed to hold its breath. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. They were no longer alone. Before he could react, a shadow moved in front of them. The girl gasped, and in a flash, Jack drew his blaster, aiming it at the figure that had appeared out of the shadows. It was one of the soldiers, their leader, to be precise. His armor gleamed in the dim light, his face still hidden behind a black helmet. He stood tall and unmoving, the faint hum of his weapon crackling to life in his gloved hand. "We're getting tired of chasing you." The leader's voice came through the helmet speaker, cold and menacing. "You can't hide forever." Jack's finger hovered over the trigger, his muscles tense and ready to fire. But the girl didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her posture defiant, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. She was ready. She wasn't just going to give up, but neither was Jack. Not now. "We won't give her to you," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it is you want, it's not happening." The leader's helmet tilted slightly, as though considering his words. Then a faint chuckle escaped from the speaker. "You don't understand, do you?" The leader sneered. "This isn't about choice. She's carrying something we need, and you're in the way." The girl didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on the soldier. Her chest was rising and falling with shallow breaths, but there was something in her gaze, a quiet strength that Jack hadn't noticed before. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. In one swift motion, the leader raised his blaster, pointing it straight at Jack. Before Jack could react, the girl raised her hand, and in that instant, the glowing device in her grip pulsed with energy. A sharp, high-pitched hum filled the air, and suddenly, a blast of pure light erupted from the device, hitting the soldier square in the chest. The force of the blast sent the leader flying backward, his body slamming into the far wall with a sickening crunch. The sound of his armor scraping against the metal floor echoed through the ship, and for a moment, everything was still. Jack stared, wide-eyed, As the girl lowered her hand, her expression unchanged. She had just taken down one of the most dangerous people Jack had ever encountered with nothing more than a glowing artifact. "Dildo, what was that?" Jack stammered, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just turned and continued moving, her pace quicker now, as if nothing had happened. Jack hesitated for a moment, looking back at the crumpled figure of the leader. He wasn't moving. Swallowing his disbelief, Jack followed her, his mind reeling with questions. He knew the device was important, but he hadn't expected that. What kind of power was hidden in that thing? And what had the soldiers been after? Ahead, a narrow door slid open, and the girl slipped through without a second thought. Jack followed, heart still pounding from the adrenaline. They were in a new section of the ship now, darker, quieter, as if they had crossed into another world. The walls here were slick with condensation, and the air smelled metallic and cold. Something was different about this place. Darker, as if the ship itself had become an enemy. The girl was moving faster now, almost running, and Jack had to quicken his pace to keep up. They passed through what seemed to be an old cargo hold, its space filled with scattered crates and broken equipment. The walls were lined with strange symbols, markings Jack didn't recognize. It was like they had entered the ship's very core, its heart. Then, without warning, the girl stopped, her head tilted slightly, and Jack watched her closely, wondering if she had heard something. And then he heard it too. A distant, deep rumble. A warning. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the shadows, his hand still gripping his blaster. Something was coming. Another sound, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable hiss of an opening door. And then came the heavy, deliberate footsteps, much heavier than the soldiers' light tread. This was something much bigger. Whatever it was approaching fast. Jack could feel the pressure mounting. They had only seconds to act. "We need to move," Jack urged, his voice urgent. The girl nodded, but for the first time, there was no fear in her expression, only determination. She had already made her decision. They weren't running anymore. And whatever was coming, it wasn't going to stop them. A fight for survival. The rumbling grew louder, vibrating through the very bones of the ship. Jack's pulse quickened as he and the girl moved deeper into the maze-like hallways. The sounds of footsteps had shifted. They were no longer human footsteps. No, these were heavier, deliberate, and impossibly fast. Whatever was coming wasn't just a soldier, it was something far worse. The girl moved swiftly ahead, her silver hair flickering like a shadow, her body low and nimble. Jack, on the other hand, found himself struggling to keep up. The corridors seemed to stretch out infinitely, and every turn felt like a trap. He didn't know how much longer they could outrun whatever was chasing them. Then, up ahead, Jack saw it. A darkened door slid open, revealing an old gutted control room. The screens were cracked, the consoles covered in dust and dead wires. But in the center of the room stood something that caught his attention. A large, intact control panel. The heart of the ship's systems. If they could access it, they might be able to override the security lockdown and access the ship's weapons or emergency systems. The girl didn't hesitate. She darted straight for the control panel, fingers flying over the ancient switches with a precision Jack could only admire. She was a machine, a force of nature. Jack quickly joined her, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the enemy. Suddenly, the sound of pounding footsteps stopped. Silence filled the room, and Jack's stomach twisted. He knew they were close, very close. Then, out of the shadows, it emerged. The figure was tall, massive, armored, and menacing. It was unlike any soldier Jack had seen before. Its armor was sleek, a jet-black exoskeleton with glowing red eyes peering out from underneath the helmet. It moved with unnatural precision, its hands gripping a massive, jagged weapon, something that looked like a cross between a sword and a plasma cannon. It was a hunter, A killer. And it was coming for them. "Move!" Jack shouted to the girl, his voice sharp with panic. But she didn't move. She was still focused on the control panel, her fingers dancing over the broken systems with terrifying speed. The hunter raised its weapon. Jack barely had time to react. He dove for cover, rolling behind a broken console, just as a surge of energy shot past him, narrowly missing his side. The blast scorched the wall behind him, leaving a jagged hole. The girl was still at the control panel. She didn't look up. She was too focused. Jack knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to override the ship's security system, to unlock the weapon systems or trigger an escape pod. But she needed time, and time was something they didn't have. The hunter turned, its weapon humming as it charged up for another blast. Jack glanced over at the girl. "We don't have much time. Finish what you're doing." Without warning, Jack jumped out from behind cover, firing his blaster. The shot hit the hunter's shoulder, but it didn't even flinch. The armor was too thick. The hunter's red eyes locked onto him, and the weapon crackled with energy once more. Jack dove again as the blast shot past him, the heat searing the air around him. He had to do something. He had to buy them time. His eyes scanned the control room for any other options. That's when he saw it, an old, rusted emergency hatch in the floor. If he could get it open, they could escape down into the lower levels, away from the hunter. "Get down," Jack shouted, his voice strained with urgency. The girl didn't need to be told twice. Without looking back, she slid into a crouch, taking cover behind a broken console, just as another blast from the hunter's weapon scorched the floor where she had been standing. Jack rushed toward the hatch, his heart racing. The hunter was fast, but Jack was desperate. He grabbed the rusty handle, pulling with all his strength. The hatch creaked and groaned, but it gave way. He threw it open, revealing a dark, narrow shaft leading down into the ship's depths. "Come on," Jack shouted, but the girl wasn't moving. She was still at the control panel, her face a mask of concentration. Jack's chest tightened. She couldn't keep working on the controls. They had to escape now. The hunter was closing in. Jack could feel it. He turned back to the girl, but just as he was about to run toward her, the walls of the room shook with a deafening crash. The hunter had thrown a blast that shattered the far wall, leaving a massive hole in the ship's structure. The force of the explosion sent Jack flying backward, slamming into the floor. Pain shot through his body, but there was no time to think about it. The air was thick with smoke, and the hunter was almost upon them. Jack crawled toward the girl, grabbing her arm. "We're leaving now," Jack growled, his voice hoarse. The girl didn't hesitate this time. She grabbed the device, the glowing stone in her hand pulsing brighter, and in a flash, she was on her feet. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. With one last, desperate glance at the hunter, whose weapon was now aimed directly at them, Jack pulled the girl toward the hatch. Together, they slid down into the dark shaft below just as the hunter fired. The blast hit the ceiling above them, sending a cascade of sparks and debris falling through the shaft. But they were already moving, already falling into the darkness. They had escaped the immediate threat. But Jack knew this was far from over. The worst was yet to come. The final stand. The darkness of the ship's lower levels was suffocating. As Jack and the girl descended through the narrow shaft, the last remnants of light flickered behind them, leaving them alone in a black void of steel and silence. Their breath echoed in the tight corridor as they finally landed on solid ground. Jack stumbled, regaining his balance, but the girl didn't pause. She was already moving forward, her figure almost ghostly in the pitch-black space. Her pace was faster now, more urgent, and Jack knew it was because they had no more time. The hunter would be close behind, relentless, and sooner or later, they'd run out of places to hide. Jack glanced at the girl, his pulse racing. He had no idea where they were headed, but one thing was clear: she wasn't just running to survive anymore. She was running towards something. And whatever that something was, it was their last hope. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice tight with exhaustion. The girl didn't stop or look back. She just pointed ahead, where the narrow corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. They had to trust her. The silence of the lower levels was unlike anything Jack had ever felt. It wasn't just the quiet of a derelict ship. It was the quiet of something ancient, something forgotten by time. The walls were scarred with age, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and worn. The deeper they went, the more Jack began to feel like they were walking into the heart of the ship's long-dead past. The girl's movements grew more frantic, her eyes darting in every direction. Jack felt it too. Something was down here with them. A low hum reverberated from the walls, and then the ship groaned beneath their feet. Jack's heart skipped. Whatever was chasing them wasn't far behind. The girl suddenly stopped in front of a massive, reinforced door, the kind that looked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. The surface was covered in strange symbols, alien markings that glowed faintly in the dim light. She reached out and touched the door, her fingers running over the symbols, as if she were deciphering a code only she understood. Jack stepped closer, his body tense with anticipation. "What's behind this door?" he asked. The girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. With a single motion, she pressed a button on the side of the door. The metal groaned in protest as the thick seal began to release. Jack's breath hitched. They were running out of time. The hunter was getting closer. With a hiss of hydraulic pressure, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark room beyond. Jack squinted, trying to make out anything in the shadows. As they stepped inside, the air felt colder, more electric. The atmosphere was thick with energy, almost like a storm was gathering. "Is this it?" Jack asked, stepping further into the room, his gaze flicking from corner to corner. "Is this where we ended?" The girl nodded without looking at him. She stepped to the center of the room, and Jack felt something in the air shift. The device she carried, the glowing artifact, began to pulse, its light growing brighter with every second. The walls around them seemed to hum with the same energy, reacting to the artifact as if it were alive. Jack took a step back, his senses alert. Something was wrong. A presence, cold, malevolent. The ship itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Heavy, mechanical, unrelenting. Jack's heart sank as he turned to see the hunter standing in the doorway. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and the weapon in its hands crackled with deadly energy. "You can't escape." The hunter's voice came, amplified and distorted through the helmet speakers. "The girl and the device belong to us. Surrender now." Jack's hand instinctively went to his blaster, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against that thing. It was relentless. And it wasn't alone. Behind the hunter, other soldiers emerged from the shadows. More of them, all carrying weapons ready for the kill. The girl stepped forward, standing tall despite the odds. Her eyes were fierce, determined. She turned to Jack, giving him a silent look that spoke volumes. This was the moment. The device in her hand pulsed one final time, and Jack could feel the air crackle with energy. It wasn't just an artifact anymore. It was a weapon. And in that moment, Jack understood. The girl was going to end this, but she couldn't do it alone. He grabbed his blaster, taking a deep breath. "We fight together," he said, more to himself than to her. The hunter advanced, its weapon charging up. But Jack didn't wait. He fired first, the blast hitting one of the soldiers square in the chest. The soldier dropped, its armor cracking with the impact. But it wasn't enough. The others kept coming, advancing with calculated precision. The girl raised the glowing device, her hand steady. In an instant, a brilliant light erupted from the artifact, filling the entire room. Jack shielded his eyes as the room was bathed in an overwhelming, searing glow. The air hummed with energy, pure, unrelenting energy. The hunter faltered for a moment, the light briefly blinding it. And that was all they needed. The girl pushed forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Now." The device pulsed one final time, sending a shockwave of raw energy through the room. The walls trembled as the blast tore through the soldiers, sending them flying back against the walls with bone-crushing force. The hunter was lifted off the ground, its armor cracking and buckling under the pressure. Jack watched, breathless, as the energy from the artifact spiraled outward. The soldier's weapon exploded in midair, and with a final, thunderous crack, the hunter collapsed in a heap, its glowing red eyes dimming. Silence followed. The room was still. Jack and the girl stood, panting, the aftermath of the battle echoing in the heavy air. They had won, but at what cost? Jack's eyes flicked to the girl. She was exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she lowered the device. But she had done it. She had defeated them. Together, they had ended the threat. But as Jack looked around the broken control room, he knew that the battle wasn't just about survival. It was about something much bigger, something that could change everything. With the enemy vanquished and the ship finally quiet, Jack turned to the girl. What happens now? The girl looked up, her eyes tired but unyielding. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And with that, they stepped forward into the unknown.